So you want to make an impact. You're thinking about starting a business, sharing your voice. How do women do it that handle motherhood, family, and still chase after those dreams? Well, listen each week as we dive into the stories of women who know. This is Call Me CEO. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Call Me CEO. And today's episode is for all of you authors out there, people who have a burning passion of something they want to share, something you want to write a book about. And I hope for all of you listening that is you. I think that there is a book inside each and every one of us. And today we have Mary Adkins with us today, who is a 3-time author, a mother, and has recently wrote the program, the Book Incubator, which is a 12-month program where you can write 45 minutes, 5 days a week, and write a book within a year. Thank you so much, Mary, for being with us today. I'm
so happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I think this story, your story, is fascinating because like I said in the intro, I think everyone has a book within them, but we feel like it's such a daunting task. So I can't wait to dive into that. But first, introduce yourself and tell us about where you live and your family and what made you want to become an author.
Yeah, sure. So I live in Nashville, Tennessee, with my husband, who is in genetics, and my son, Finn, who is 3.5 years old. He's about to turn 4. And I have published 3 novels with my publisher, HarperCollins, and they came out in 2019, 2020, and 2021. And my son was born in 2018.
Wow.
So that gives you a sense of how my writing has really overlapped with my parenting. In fact, my second novel sold the night that I had Finn. And I got the email while I was in my hospital bed that the novel had sold. So it was a really exciting 24 hours. But then I had to write it. It actually sold on proposal. So then I had to write it with a newborn at home. So basically I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but I have had to really learn how to juggle parenting and career, because my husband was in grad school, so I was supporting him with a full-time job and writing novels. I had to do it all at the same time. And so it was great. I mean, it was hard, but it gave me, I learned processes for doing it. And that's what I teach now in my program. So now I work with writers who want to write novels and memoirs, but they all have full-time jobs. Most of them have families. They get it done, but they aren't getting it done by writing hours a day, because you don't have to. You truly don't have to write hours a day. Sorry, what were you going to say? To answer your question, I was going to say, I always loved writing growing up when I was a kid. I always wanted to be a writer. I had a short detour where I went to law school. I liked law school, but I became a lawyer and then did not like actually being a lawyer. So I quit that job pretty quickly. And then after that had basically was just kind of working odd jobs to pay my bills while I was writing. Writing has been my passion ever since then.
That's so cool. I think that writing a book can feel so daunting. So how do you go from concept, just going into the publishing zone, if you don't mind for a moment? I want to know, say that you have a concept or an idea. How do you go about getting a publisher, and how did you decide the best route as opposed to self-publishing or, going a different way?
Yeah. So the way it works with what they call traditional publishing, which is finding a publisher to buy your book from you and sell it to other people, basically, is you have to write it first. For most books, you're going to have to write it first. You don't get to write up a proposal. And that's true whether you're writing a novel or a memoir, although sometimes with memoir you can sell it on a proposal, but basically you want to write the book. I was working on a novel, so I knew I needed to write the book, and then I could try to find a publisher for it. And the way to go from that point A to point C, I guess you write and you revise and then you pitch it, and hopefully someone wants to publish it. That's what we do in my program. So that's they're really distinct phases. And so what I like to tell people is with the concept, what I think is a really good idea to start out with is, what is the big human question that this book wants to tackle? And I think it's a really helpful exercise, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, because if there's a big question you want to tackle, and you don't have to know the answer to it, but if there's a big question you want to tackle, it's finding what that like universal seed is of your story that other people are going to connect to. And it gives you something to write toward. I find that it's really helpful to ask it as a question for that reason rather than a statement, because then I think we as the writer, it's easier for us to be open-minded and to like really explore possible answers to it and be curious about it instead of kind of closed off or preachy or like, here's my answer. So for example, like, how do you overcome grief, or how do you learn to live with grief, or when is ambition an unhealthy thing, or like these are all like big human questions that you could really spend a whole book exploring, whether you're writing fictional characters you've made up or you're writing about your own life experience, so that's how I like to advise that people start, is like with a big question that they want to answer.
I love that concept, because I think whether we're creating a product or a book, we're always trying to solve a problem or answer a question or explore possibility that way. So I think that's really good advice. What was it for you? What were your questions that you started with for your book?
That's a good question. So my first novel was, how do you make peace with an unlived life when you're facing death? So this character finds out she only has 6 months to live, but she thought her life hadn't even started yet. She was in her early 30s. She hasn't, and this is fiction, but she's in her early 30s. She wanted to start a bakery. She hasn't done that. She wanted to marry and have kids. She hasn't done that. And she finds out that what she thought was basically a warm up was her whole life. Like, it's going to be over. And so she has to find a way to come to peace with that in just a few months. And that's what she works on doing in the book. And I mean, to be honest, like that book's not autobiographical, it's fiction. I didn't have a terminal illness like the character does. I wasn't facing death, but I was really, that was a sincere question that I was thinking about asking, like, how would I find peace if I found out that all this time I had was all the time I had? Because I was turning 30 and I felt like everything up to that point had been a warm up. Like, I felt like I hadn't started my life yet. And I thought that would just be a heartbreaking thing to face. And I wanted to come to terms with that for myself. It was a sincere question that I was asking when I was writing that novel.
That's really fascinating. And I think it's also intriguing that the time that your books came out was in parallel with the pandemic happening and then becoming a mother. And so I don't know what the next questions were of your book, but do you find that as you're writing a book that your life does affect those questions and the creativity that you have with your circumstance?
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. Like, it's, and I think that's it's funny because in our meeting, our weekly writing meeting in the program yesterday, someone asked the question, like, when I'm writing fiction, when I'm writing toward a big question, I'm writing fiction, but I'm writing toward a big question that my character is facing, but I'm not ready to face it for myself in my own life. How do I write my character facing it when I can't face it yet? And he asked that question and everyone in the chat was like, you're describing all of us. And it was so interesting to see that for so many people who are like working on writing these books, whether they're writing like memoir, which is based on their own lives, or fiction, they're trying to explore something through their writing that they themselves are working on figuring out. And I'd always felt it was interesting to see how many people said that, because I've always felt that way. Like, you're exactly right. Like, what I'm exploring in my novels has been something that personally I'm interested in.
What do you think is the biggest misconception of becoming an author?
Oh, that it takes loads and loads of time. Like when I tell people that like, oh, you can just write, write 30 minutes a day, write 45 minutes a day, write 2 days a week for like an hour and a half each day. And you'll not only finish a draft in a year, you'll finish a draft in probably 4 months, maybe 5 months, and then you can revise it. And by the end of the year, you'll be ready to like publish it. They don't believe me. A lot of people don't believe me, but then they do it and it works. And I do think it's important. Like, it does matter the way that you do it. I mean, I think I mentioned there are these phases. Like, I think the writing phase is different from the revising phase. And it's really important to keep those separate. And the reason I think a lot of times people think it takes hours a day and it takes years to write a book is because they're trying to do those two things at the same time. Mm-hmm. They're trying to write and revise at the same time. And they're totally different mindsets. Like writing is, I think writing a first draft is all about like kind of closing your eyes and going. You just try to experience the story. Again, whether it's true or not, you like relive it. If it's true, you live it for the first time if you're making it up in your head, and you write down what's going on with the movie that's playing in your mind. You're just like transcribing it and not judging it and not thinking about, am I using the wrong verbs? Should I not be using adverbs? Do I sound smart? Like those things will be going through your head, but you're just setting them aside and focusing on experiencing the story. And then in revision, that's when you can come in and think, dude, is this interesting? Like you can do all the analysis. That's like the analyzing phase. But especially when you can like let yourself separate those into two different phases, it's very possible to write a first draft of a book in a few months because you're just letting it flow out of you. Another thing I like to tell people that I learned after my son was born is to experiment with handwriting, because Finn, my son, was born on April 3rd of 2018. And after you publish your first book, a lot of times you can sell your subsequent books on a proposal. So you just describe the book and the publisher will buy it, and then you have to write it. And so that's what happened. That night that he was born is this novel sold on proposal. So then I had to write it, and I was very excited. I had my second book contract. It was great, but also like I had a newborn and I didn't sleep. So I found it more difficult than ever to write because I was tired. I was nursing. I would like look at the computer screen and just not be able to do it. And so I decided to experiment with writing to like write by hand. I'm like, well, let's just see if this works. Maybe changing it up will help. And so I got a notebook and started trying to write this story by hand. And it worked. That worked for me. It like liberated me from the pressure of seeing the typed words on the screen. And so now I stuck with that. So for my novel after that, I hand wrote the first draft for that one too, because it had just been such a liberating experience. So that's something I also try to encourage people to experiment with when they're writing a first draft is to just try writing it by hand, see how it goes.
That's interesting. I love those two tips to work with, just letting it flow the first time through, then analyze it and work with the medium as well, because I think that our brain flow, it goes in different compartments of our brain. So that makes sense to me that if you're writing it out, just let it come out and don't worry about making it perfect, because I think perfection is a mind block. And it can also be procrastination. When I heard once that someone said perfectionism is just another word for procrastination, I'm like, oh, that one stings,
It does. That's a gut punch.
It's true. Like it can get in the way. So I love that you said that. And then also to switch up the medium, because sometimes paper to pen feels more organic. And I can only imagine like what a prized possession that is, to have like your words written for your kids to see years down the road. Like, I think that's such a cool legacy.
Yeah.
Tell me about transitioning from being an author before and after becoming a mom. Like that's a huge adjustment. And you've talked a little bit about that computer screen being a block for you. What other things did you have to overcome?
So one thing that was really bizarre about it was, and this was really it went away eventually, but right after, I don't know, I guess I shouldn't speak for all moms. I was going to say, remember, but like, well, I guess
You
all
can say
parents are
remember
different.
when.
I remember you have a baby and like nothing else seems like it's important.
Mhm.
And maybe that's biological, but like nothing else seems like it's important. It's just like my job was just to keep this human alive, and anything else just seemed like um expendable, dispensable. Like I don't need to worry about it. And so that I had that kind of feeling, and that was weird because I had always cared so much about writing and cared so much about my books and my characters, and all of a sudden I didn't care about them. It was like I I don't I don't feel invested in the story because all I'm thinking about is like this little guy in the other room and what he needs. And it was scary because it was scary. It was like an identity crisis because
Mm.
I had always cared so much. I was like, do I not want to be a writer anymore? Like, what do I not want to write? And so I did. Have you ever heard of morning pages?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I did morning pages.
So
And
explain
so,
explain what it is
okay.
for. Yeah.
So this came out of a book by the author Julia Cameron, and the book is called The Artist's Way, and it helps you get unlocked creatively if you're feeling stuck. And she has this tool called morning pages where you wake up and first thing in the morning, you just handwrite stream of consciousness, you handwrite 3 pages and you just brain dump. It can be your grocery list or the dream you had. I mean, you're not trying to be anything. You're not trying to be clever or write anything anyone is going to read. And the idea is that it helps you work through all of that, all of the baggage that you're dealing with, so that you can express yourself creatively in the way that you really want to. And so I started doing morning pages to work through that, and it really helped. Like I could kind of write out like, this is what I'm afraid of. I need to keep him alive, and I'm tired, and I was writing all of those feelings down, and I found that once I got them out on paper, gradually I started to become interested in writing about other characters again. Um, and then another really interesting thing that I found that I did not expect after being a mom was that I right away, like the thing that I wanted most, obviously, other than keeping my little baby alive, like the thing that I wanted most for him in life as a human was joy. And like that came to me very early on. Like what do I want for him? I want joy. I want to create a pathway for him to have joy. And once that occurred to me, I realized that in my writing, I had not given my characters joy. And that suddenly seemed really sad to me because I was thinking of them like as real people. And if they had a parent, like they had a mom, she would be like, the one thing I want you to give this character is joy. so so I started writing, like actually intentionally writing joyous moments for my characters after I became a parent.
Hmm. That's really cool. I have one close friend who is an author and has written many fiction books. And
Hmm.
what's really fascinating to me is that she says that her characters will have conversations in her mind all the time, where she'll just have to
Mm.
like stop and write it down, and she'll in her mind be talking to them, or they'll be talking to her. Does that happen to you?
Yeah, that's kind of what I mean by the first draft, you're just writing down the movie that's playing in your
Mhm.
mind.
Mhm.
It's like I'm just hearing it and I just feel like I'm the person transcribing. Like I'm just writing down what's happening in there. Yeah,
That's so
it's
cool.
weird.
Well, and I think that relating to them personally in that way, and then having that motherhood, that caring, that protectiveness of, I want them to have joy, like that's really special. I think that's cool that you recognize that, and it changed and influenced your writing forever, because that's what
Yeah,
motherhood does. It changes you forever. So
yeah.
with working with parents moving forward, you've given us some really good advice with ways to write a book. What would be your take this first step move if someone's listening and they're like, I want to do this? What would you say?
Yeah. Okay. So in my experience, like you said at the beginning when we started talking, like people they sense it when they have a book in them. They're like, no, I
Mhm.
know this is me. I know, like,
Mhm.
and so if you're listening and that's you, I think like lean into it. You can do this. You really can. And you don't need to quit your job and you don't need to neglect your kids. I like, just to give you a couple of inspiring examples. I've worked with someone who wrote her novel. I didn't know this till after she finished it, but she told me she literally wrote it in the pickup line to pick up her kids from school. Like she wrote it
I love that.
in her van in the driver's seat. And handwriting is, she says, is what allowed her to do that because she could take a notebook. Like she didn't have to have her laptop on the steering wheel. Like she had a notebook and she wrote her whole novel that way. Another woman I work with who's the mom of two, is also a doctor and during the pandemic wrote her novel like on the notes app of her phone, like the yellow notes app on her phone, like in between patients. She was just like let the characters do their thing. And she would check. It's so funny because if I look back at our emails, I see she's like, is it okay if I write on my notes app? And I say, yeah. And then a few months later, she's like, I'm halfway through a novel on my notes app. Can I really keep writing this whole novel on my notes app? And I'm like, yeah. And then a few months later, she's like, I just finished an entire novel on my phone. So like she wrote the whole novel on her phone. And I just love stories like that because I think it gives us permission to realize that like writing a book doesn't have to look like one. It doesn't have to look one way. It doesn't have to be a laptop. Yeah.
Do you think, as far as knowing like the framework, and I'm sure your course helps with this, but like, how do you know when it's long enough? Like, how do you know that it's the right length or that do you know what I'm saying? Like, how do you know?
Exactly. So a good length for a first draft is going to be 70,000 words. And that's going to be true if you're writing for adults or if you're writing for young adults, even for teenagers, it's about 70,000 words. If you're writing for a younger audience, like they say middle grade, like kids in elementary school, it can be shorter than that, like 40,000. But otherwise you want to go for 70,000. Now, if you're writing by hand, so this is what I had to figure out when I was writing by hand, because exactly what you're saying. Like, how do I know when I've written enough? I have no idea how much I've written.
Yeah.
If you fill 4 notebooks of about 100 pages each, that's about 70,000 words. So that's a good guideline, is like, and we actually call it the 4 notebooks method in my program, where you're like filling 4 notebooks that have about 100 pages. Good question. Only the fronts of the pages. You need to write on 100 pages.
Okay.
So only the front, as long as the notebook has 100 pages, but a lot of notebooks have like 50. So you would need to write front and back.
Oh, I see.
Like you need to be writing on the surface of 100 pages in the notebook, basically. And if you do that for 4 notebooks, you'll have about 70,000 words.
Well, that's really cool. I mean, I want to write a book eventually. I don't know when or what exactly. Nice. I've written a few programs. So I know there's one in me. And so when I was contacted from your publicist, like, do this.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, I want to hear what she has to say.
Cool.
So just leading up with that, for someone who does say that they take your course, they write the book, what next as far as publicist? Did you hire one right away, or was that something that came down the road after you'd done it for a while?
Yeah. So you'll want to, okay. So do you mean in terms of getting the book published, or you mean in terms of getting the book in front of people?
I guess both. Because they're different.
Yeah. Because they are different. Like, I think, because now I'm at the stage where I'm just like, getting my books out there and getting my program out there. Like they already exist in the world. But before you get to that stage, you want to find a publisher or self-publish. And what I'm an expert in is finding the publisher, which is a tough road to go, but I actually think in a lot of ways is easier than self-publishing, because although self-publishing is easy on the front end, like you just kind of put it out there. A lot of times people think it's hard to get the second thing we're talking about, like getting it in front of readers, is harder, because you basically have to become a small business and like have a marketing department. And which I think a lot of times authors don't realize. They think like, oh, I'll just self-publish and then the readers will all come, like they'll just read my book, and it would be very nice if it works that way, but
wouldn't it?
For most of us, it doesn't.
Yeah.
So like in my program, so I help people find the publisher, and then that's where it ends. And then after that, authors, are expected to help out with publicity and promotion and like help find readers, even if they have a publisher,
Yeah.
just because it takes a village, you know?
Yes, it does, with just about everything in life. So, well, this has been so enlightening. I appreciate you coming and sharing with us what you know. And I'm sure there are people listening and wanting to talk to you more. So tell our audience where they can find you.
Great. Yes. So my name is Mary Adkins with a D, not like the diet. Everyone always thinks it's T, do you
Oh,
remember the diet? You know,
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
Atkins?
Uh-huh.
It's old school. But it's with the Mary Adkins with a D, writer, like WRITER.com. And yeah, they can learn about my books there and about the program if they're interested in checking it out. I have a bunch of free trainings and you know, obviously have an email list where I send writing tips and stuff. So that's where they'd go to find me.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much for coming today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.